I was just driving home when I saw my wife's white Cadillac parked at my son's house, and what I heard next shattered every sermon I'd ever preached about love and loyalty. Standing outside that window, I listened to my own wife and daughter-in-law plotting to strip me of everything I'd built with my bare hands. 25 years of faith gone in seconds. My heart didn't just break, it caught fire. I stood there frozen, realizing my whole life had been a lie wrapped in Sunday smiles. Before we go on, subscribe and tell me what state you're watching from, because what happened next will leave you speechless. Through that half-open window, I stood there listening, barely breathing. Evelyn's laughter floated out into the evening air, light and cruel, the kind of laugh she used to reserve for me when we were still in love. But now it sounded different, sharp, greedy, mean. Marcus's voice followed smooth like oil. He was bragging about numbers, about timing, about how easy it would be to file the paperwork once the old man signed over the trust. That old man was me. They spoke about my company, the one I started with nothing but a rusted pickup, a hammer, and a prayer. $15 million, he said, like it was pocket change. I could almost see the smirk on his face through the glass. My hand gripped the window frame until my knuckles went white. Every word sliced through me. My wife, the woman who'd stood next to me at the altar, was plotting with another man to take what I'd built from dust. It wasn't just money they were after. It was legacy. It was respect. It was my life's work, the sweat and broken bones of 3 decades. Evelyn, my prayer partner, my Sunday smile, the one who used to shout amen. Louder than anyone, she'd turned my faith into a weapon against me. I thought back to every church service we'd sat through, holding hands while the choir sang about grace. Every time she leaned her head on my shoulder when folks said, "That's a strong couple right there," I wanted to scream, to kick that door open and make them see me standing there, to make them choke on their own words. But I didn't move. I couldn't. My knees felt like stone. All I could do was listen as they laughed about the fool who trusted too much. Marcus said something about the paperwork already being handled, that all Evelyn had to do was make me believe she still loved me long enough to sign the final transfer. She chuckled, low and bitter. "James always said God provides," she said. "Well, maybe he just provided through better hands." They both laughed. That laughter will haunt me for the rest of my life. The porch light flickered above me, and I took a step back into the shadows. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it over their voices. I wanted to walk away, to pretend I hadn't heard a thing, but I knew if I turned my back now I'd be signing my own defeat. The air smelled like rain, thick and heavy, and the neighborhood was quiet except for them. Their words were poison, and I drank every drop. When I finally tore myself away, I got into my truck and just sat there, staring at the steering wheel. The same hands that built every home, every church roof, every community center in this town were shaking. I could still hear their laughter echoing in my ears. It wasn't just betrayal, it was mockery. They weren't just stealing from me. They were laughing while doing it. I drove home without remembering how I got there. The streetlights blurred past like ghosts. When I pulled into my driveway, I didn't get out right away. The house looked different now. The place we'd raised our kids, prayed over meals, argued, and made up, it all looked hollow, like every memory had been scrubbed clean and replaced with lies. I sat there for a long time, engine idling, headlights cutting across the porch where Evelyn had once kissed me goodnight. Inside, the air was still. I dropped my keys on the counter and walked to my study. The family Bible sat open where I'd left it that morning. The verse stared up at me. "Be sure your sin will find you out." I almost laughed. Maybe God had a sense of timing after all. I poured myself a glass of water, hands trembling so bad I spilled half of it on the floor. I leaned against the counter trying to breathe. I thought about Marcus, slick young, always with that fake respect in his tone when he called me sir. I thought about how Evelyn defended him, saying he was just ambitious. I used to see a bit of myself in that boy. Now I just saw a snake. And her, I didn't even know who she was anymore. Maybe I never did. Maybe I was too blinded by love and scripture to see the woman she'd become. The clock on the wall ticked louder than usual, steady and cold. I sat down at my desk, opened the drawer, and pulled out the old ledger I'd used back when I started the business. Every line in that book told the story of a man who refused to quit jobs taken on faith payments, made late prayers answered at the last minute. I'd worked too hard for anyone to take it from me, not my wife, not some slick talker, not anyone. As I turned the pages, I felt something inside me shift. The pain didn't fade, it sharpened. It became something I could hold. Rage, yes, but not the kind that makes you reckless. The kind that makes you quiet, focused. The kind of anger that doesn't scream, it calculates. I looked around the room and realized I didn't feel like the same man anymore. The pastor, the husband, the builder, all those versions of me had been burned away in that single moment at the window. What was left was something colder, steadier. I didn't pray for mercy that night. I didn't ask for forgiveness. I just sat there and made a decision. They wanted to take my legacy, fine, but they'd never see it coming. The same patience that built my business would now become their undoing. I'd let them think they'd won. I'd smile, nod, play the part of the blind old fool one last time. And when the moment was right, I'd pull the foundation out from under them. Brick by brick. The rain finally started tapping against the window like a metronome. I stood there watching it fall and thought about all the people who'd ever trusted me, who'd ever said, "You're a good man, Pastor." For the first time, I wasn't sure that was true anymore. Maybe being good had made me weak. Maybe I'd confused kindness for blindness. But that was over now. Outside, lightning cracked across the sky, bright enough to light up the entire street. I saw my reflection in the glass, hard eyes, tight jaw, a man reborn in the storm. Before the night was over, I'd already decided how it would end. I wasn't going to just take back what was mine. I was going to make them remember who they betrayed. And believe me, they would remember. What happened next changed everything. When I finally stepped out from behind that hedge, my heart was beating so loud it drowned out the crickets. Evelyn froze mid-sentence, her hand still resting on Marcus's arm. His smile faltered just for a split second before he put it back on like a well-practiced mask. Evelyn recovered faster than I expected. "James," she said sweetly, "what a surprise. We were just talking about you." Her voice was smooth, warm, almost rehearsed. Marcus nodded, pretending to shuffle some papers on the patio table. "Church committee work," he added, eyes meeting mine with that politician's kind of calm. The air between us was thick. I could smell the faint scent of her perfume gardenia, the one she always wore to Sunday service. It used to bring me comfort. Now it made me sick. I glanced down at the stack of manila folders on the table, the corner of one labeled Carter Holdings. My company. My life. My blood turned cold. "I didn't realize you two were so involved in church projects together," I said, forcing a polite smile. My voice was steady, but every syllable tasted like rust. Evelyn laughed too quickly, too brightly. "Oh, honey, you know how these committees are. Always some last-minute paperwork. I was just helping Marcus go over a few things." Her hand brushed his arm again, casual, familiar. My gut twisted. Marcus adjusted his tie, that same smug composure never cracking. "Pastor, your wife's been a great help. We were just about finished, actually." His tone was slick professional, the kind of voice that could sell lies dressed up as truth. I studied his eyes, waiting for a flicker, a tell. Nothing. That's when I realized this wasn't their first time lying together. Evelyn's hand trembled slightly as she reached for her purse. I caught it. Not much, but enough to confirm what I already knew. She was scared. Not of guilt, but of exposure. "Well," I said, stepping closer, "I hope whatever project this is, it's worth the late-night meetings." She chuckled again, eyes darting toward Marcus. "You know me, always helping out where I can." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. There was a silence, the kind that stretches too long and reveals everything words are trying to hide. I let it hang there, heavy and uncomfortable. The wind picked up, and somewhere down the street a screen door slammed. The world felt too normal for what was happening. I looked at her, the woman I'd prayed beside, the woman who'd held my hand at funerals, who'd whispered scripture into my ear when life got hard and I saw nothing familiar. Just a stranger in pearls. I should head home, I finally said, turning toward the gate. We've got an early service tomorrow, remember? My tone was casual, almost kind. She seemed relieved. Of course I'll be right behind you, she said quickly. Just need to wrap up a few things here. Marcus nodded, already packing up the folders, careful not to meet my eyes. I walked back to my truck, every step slow, measured. My mind was spinning, but my face didn't show it. Years of preaching had taught me how to wear calm like armor. When I got behind the wheel, I didn't start the engine right away. Through the windshield, I watched them. Evelyn leaned close to him, whispering something urgent. He shook his head. They looked nervous now. Good. I wanted them to feel the weight of my silence. It was more dangerous than my anger. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and betrayal. My reflection in the windshield looked unfamiliar, like I was staring at someone else, someone harder, colder. I thought about all the times I'd preached forgiveness, all the people I'd counseled about trust and temptation. And now here I was, the fool pastor who couldn't see the sin in his own home. Maybe I'd been so busy saving souls that I forgot to watch my own doorstep. When I pulled into the driveway, the house looked smaller, darker. The porch light flickered, casting long shadows across the front steps. I sat there for a moment before getting out, the hum of the engine filling the silence. Inside, the smell of fried catfish still lingered from dinner. The radio in the kitchen was still on, soft jazz playing like nothing had changed. But everything had. Evelyn came home 30 minutes later. I could hear the click of her heels down the hallway before she appeared in the doorway, smiling like she'd just come from choir practice. "You didn't wait up, did you?" she asked lightly. I didn't answer. She set her purse down, humming under her breath. That same old tune she used to hum when she cooked on Sundays. It made my skin crawl. "I saw you with Marcus," I said finally. Her hands froze mid-motion. She didn't look at me right away. And she asked softly, like she already had her answer ready. "You think something's going on?" Her tone was calm, almost playful, but her eyes flickered. "You know how gossip spreads, James. You of all people should know that." I stood up slowly. "I'm not talking about gossip," I said. "I'm talking about the truth." She blinked, tilting her head slightly. "The truth is that you're tired," she said. "You've been working too hard, and it's got you seeing things that aren't there." I almost laughed. That's how good she was. She could twist my reality right in front of me and make me question it. "I know what I heard," I said quietly. Her smile faltered for half a second before she caught it. "Then maybe you should pray on it," she said, her voice dropping low, sweet but sharp. "Because if you start accusing people without proof, you might ruin more than your reputation." Her words hit harder than she knew. Threat or advice, I couldn't tell. She picked up her purse again and walked past me like nothing had happened. I stood there, the smell of her perfume trailing behind her, thick and suffocating. In that moment, I realized the woman I loved wasn't gone. She was still there, buried under greed, lies, and something darker. But she wasn't mine anymore. She belonged to her ambition now, and to the man who'd whispered poison into her ear. I went to my study, shut the door, and turned off the light. The house creaked around me, every sound amplified in the dark. My pulse slowed, my mind cleared. The fury that had burned through me earlier was gone, replaced by something quieter, more dangerous. I knew what I had to do. Not tonight, not tomorrow, but soon. I would let them keep smiling, keep pretending, keep thinking I was blind. Because the most dangerous man in any room isn't the one shouting. It's the one who's finally stopped talking. And when I stopped talking that night, I knew the next word I spoke would change everything. The house was too quiet when I walked in. The kind of quiet that doesn't comfort you but presses down like a weight. I didn't bother turning on the lights. The street lamp outside spilled just enough through the window for me to see the living room, the same room that once smelled of gumbo and laughter, now smelling faintly of dust and old secrets. I dropped my keys on the coffee table and sank into the old recliner that used to belong to my father. The leather creaked beneath me, worn smooth by years of his shoulders and mine. That chair had always been a safe place, a reminder that some things in this world were solid. Tonight it felt like sitting in an empty church after the sermon, waiting for an answer that wouldn't come. My eyes drifted across the room. The wall of photographs looked different now. There was Evelyn in her white Easter hat, smiling with her arm around me like she meant it. There was our boy David holding his newborn son while I baptized him under the glow of the stained glass window. Christmas morning family cookouts, Sunday dinners, frozen moments of joy that once meant everything. But as I stared at them all, I could see were ghosts. Every picture told a lie. Every smile mocked me. I'd built this home on faith and loyalty, and now both had cracked like old plaster. I got up and walked to the bookshelf, my fingers tracing the spines of books Evelyn used to read. Devotionals, cookbooks, the same Bible she used to highlight verses in about forgiveness and virtue. I opened it. Half the pages were marked notes in her handwriting curled in the margins. Love endures all things. The irony burned. I closed it softly and set it back. Love might endure, but it doesn't always survive. I went into the kitchen, the tile cool under my feet. The table was still set for two from breakfast, half a cup of cold coffee on her side, lipstick on the rim. It was strange how betrayal could linger in something so ordinary. The smell of the morning's bacon was still faint in the air, mixed with her perfume, that gardenia scent that had followed me all day, like a curse. I poured myself a drink, bourbon, not water this time, and leaned against the counter, staring out the window into the backyard. The swing set David used as a boy stood there, rusted but upright, stubborn like me. I remembered pushing him on that swing while Evelyn laughed on the porch. I remembered the promise I made to myself that I'd always protect my family. Somewhere along the way, I'd mistaken sacrifice for protection, trust for blindness. The drink burned going down, but I welcomed the fire. I needed something alive inside me, something that wasn't numb. I thought about calling David, but what would I say? That his mother was scheming to destroy everything I'd built, that the woman who taught him about honesty and faith had traded her soul for a bank account. He wouldn't believe me, not yet. Maybe he'd see it in time, but for now I'd carry it alone. I'd carried worse. I wandered back into the living room, the floorboards creaking under my steps like the house itself was sighing. I sat again in that recliner and let my head fall back. I closed my eyes, but the images wouldn't stop. Evelyn's laughter outside that window, Marcus's smooth voice, their whispered plans like a sermon from hell. I'd always believed that evil came from outside, from temptation and strangers. I never imagined it would come dressed in Sunday clothes, smiling at my dinner table. My mind drifted to my father. He'd been a carpenter, not a preacher, but he'd known more about faith than most men of the cloth. "Don't build something you can't defend, son," he used to say. "Not a house, not a name, not a marriage." I used to think he was being cynical. Now I knew he was being honest. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, staring at the floor. I could almost hear his voice, steady and low, telling me to stand up straight, to remember who I was before the world tried to tell me otherwise. Maybe I'd forgotten that man somewhere between sermons and second chances. The clock on the mantel chimed, once the sound hollow. Midnight. I should have gone to bed, but sleep felt like a luxury I no longer deserved. I sat there staring at the wedding photo on the mantel. I remember the day it was taken, the sunlight, the applause, her hand slipping into mine. I remember believing I'd found my partner in life, the one person who'd walk beside me through everything. I couldn't remember the exact moment that woman disappeared or when this stranger took her place. I stood up and took the photo off the shelf. For a long time I just looked at it, the two of us frozen in a promise neither of us had kept. Then I set it face down. The silence that followed was the loudest sound in the room. Somewhere outside a dog barked and a car door slammed in the distance. Life kept moving even when yours stopped. I felt a strange kind of calm wash over me. Not peace, not forgiveness, just the cold stillness that comes before a storm. I'd spent my whole life preaching about grace and restraint, but grace has its limits, and mine had just run out. I poured another drink and went out to the porch. The night air was heavy with humidity, the street empty except for the glow of porch lights up and down the block. This neighborhood had seen me grow from a young man with big dreams into the man everyone trusted. They called me Pastor Carter, asked for my blessing, my advice, my prayers. If they only knew that the man standing out here tonight wasn't praying anymore. He was planning. The sound of cicadas filled the silence as I looked down the street, the bourbon warming my chest. The betrayal still hurt, but the fear was gone. In its place was something sharper, a purpose I hadn't felt in years. Evelyn thought she knew me. Marcus thought I was weak. They were both about to learn that the quietest man in the room is often the one you should fear the most. I finished the drink, set the glass down on the railing, and took one last look at the dark windows of my home. Tomorrow everything would look the same to the world, same pastor, same sermons, same smile. But inside something had shifted. The man who used to believe forgiveness could fix anything was gone. The man who remained was done waiting for miracles. And what I did next would make them wish they'd never mistaken my faith for blindness. That night I sat on the edge of the bed for a long while before my knees finally touched the floor. The wood felt cold against my skin, the kind of chill that seeps into your bones and reminds you that you're still alive, still human, even when you wish you weren't. The room was dark except for the dim glow of the streetlight slipping through the blinds. Evelyn's perfume still lingered faintly on the sheets. I should have changed them days ago, but part of me couldn't. Maybe I was punishing myself. Maybe I wanted the smell to fade on its own like everything else between us had. I didn't pray for her that night. Not for forgiveness, not for understanding, not for peace. I prayed for myself, for the strength not to drown in the rage that kept rising in my chest. The anger was heavy, poisonous, whispering that I should burn everything down and let them choke on the ashes. But another voice, quieter and older, kept breaking through the noise. My father's voice. The Lord don't sleep on truth, son. You just keep your hands clean and your heart steady. So I stayed there, kneeling, breathing slow, trying to find that steady place again. I'd spent my whole life telling people to trust God's timing, to be patient in the storm. Now, I was the one caught in it, lightning flashing in every direction, and for the first time in a long while I wasn't sure if faith was enough to hold me together. The house creaked as the wind picked up outside. Somewhere in the distance a train horn blew a long, lonely sound that cut through the night. I closed my eyes and let it fade, focusing instead on the silence that followed. When I finally opened them, I saw the photo on my nightstand, me, Evelyn, and David, taken after my first sermon at Greater Hope Baptist. We looked so proud then, so sure of ourselves. I reached for it, my hand trembling slightly, and traced the outline of their faces. I remembered that day vividly. The congregation had packed the church so tight that people were standing in the aisles. Evelyn sat in the front row, her hat big and white, her smile even bigger. David was just a boy swinging his legs, clapping off beat to the choir. When I finished preaching, the applause was thunderous. Evelyn took my hand as we walked out of the sanctuary and whispered, "This is just the beginning, baby." And she'd been right, but not about what I thought. I set the photo back down and stood pacing the room. My heart was still heavy, but there was something else underneath now, clarity. I couldn't fight them with emotion. That's what they expected. They saw me as the preacher who turned the other cheek, who'd rather quote scripture than stand his ground. They'd mistaken faith for weakness. That was their mistake. I went to the closet and pulled out the old wooden box my father had left me when he passed. It still smelled faintly of cedar. Inside were things I hadn't looked at in years: his Bible, a pocket knife, an old silver watch, and a letter folded so many times the edges had worn thin. I unfolded it carefully, the paper soft and yellowed with age. The handwriting was his strong, deliberate, every word steady as his hands had been. "Son, the world will test your faith in ways the church never will. Don't let pain make you cruel. Let it make you wise. The devil wins when he turns your heart bitter. The Lord wins when you stand firm, and let truth do the cutting for you. I read it twice, maybe 3 times, until the words burned themselves into me. My father had lived through worse things than betrayal. He'd buried friends, lost work, seen his own brother steal from him, and still kept his head high. He never raised his voice. He never sought revenge. He just built back stronger every single time. I folded the letter and slipped it into my shirt pocket. Then I sat down at the desk, pulled a notepad toward me, and started to write. Not a sermon, not a confession, just a plan. Cold, methodical, righteous. I listed every account, every property, every asset Evelyn could reach. I thought about Marcus, the way he'd smirked when I walked up to that table, how confident he'd looked beside her. He thought he'd found an easy target. He had no idea he'd picked a man who'd been fighting his whole life, just not with fists. By the time I looked up again, dawn had begun to edge its way through the blinds. The sky outside was the color of bruised steel, and the first birds were starting to sing. I felt calmer than I had in days. My anger hadn't vanished, but it had changed shape, solid now, controlled. Like a blade finally sharpened. I went to the kitchen, made a pot of coffee, and sat at the table staring out at the yard. The grass glistened with dew. The world looked fresh, like it hadn't just watched my life fall apart. I thought about church that morning, about the people who would shake my hand, ask how Evelyn was, call us their favorite couple. The lies we live behind polite smiles are something only God can see clearly. But soon everyone else would see the truth too. The phone rang. Once it was the church secretary reminding me about the morning prayer meeting. I told her I'd be there. I hung up and smiled to myself. They'd all expect the same old Pastor Carter, calm, steady, forgiving. And that's exactly what I'd give them. On the surface. Faith isn't about being blind. It's about seeing everything for what it is and still standing tall. That's what my father meant. The Lord doesn't sleep on truth, but he doesn't rush it either. He lets the wicked build their own gallows. All I had to do was keep my hands clean and my eyes open. When I finished my coffee, I went to the mirror and looked at my reflection. My eyes were tired, lined with years of work and worry, but they were steady. The man looking back at me wasn't broken. He was waiting. I put on my Sunday suit, buttoned the jacket, and slipped the old silver watch onto my wrist. My father's watch. It still ticked like it always had, slow, patient, relentless. As I walked out the door, the sun broke through the clouds, lighting the street in gold. For the first time in days, I felt something close to peace. Not the soft kind that forgives and forgets, but the fierce kind that remembers and still moves forward. By the time I locked the door behind me, I already knew what came next. And when the time was right, I'd make sure they learned that the Lord may not sleep, but neither did I. The first light of morning broke through the blinds, thin and pale, spilling across my desk like a silent invitation. I'd been awake all night watching the clock tick toward dawn. My decision was already made. Now it was time to move. The coffee in my mug had gone cold hours ago, but I didn't care. I picked up the phone, dialed a number I'd known by heart for 30 years, and waited through 2 rings before hearing a groggy voice on the other end. "Morning, Randall," I said quietly. There was a pause, the sound of a man sitting up in bed. "Pastor." "You all right? I will be," I said. "But I need your help, and I need it now." Randall Price wasn't just one of my deacons. He was the kind of man who understood silence better than most preachers understood words. He didn't ask questions right away. He just said, "Give me 10 minutes to get dressed." By the time he arrived, the sun was peeking over the horizon, turning the street gold and soft. He walked in still buttoning his shirt, his Bible tucked under one arm, a leather briefcase under the other. I poured him a fresh cup of coffee and slid it across the table. He sat down slowly, studying me. "This about Evelyn," I nodded once. His jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. Randall had known us since before David was born. He'd seen our marriage through every high and low. "Tell me what you need," he said finally. I leaned back, folded my hands, and told him everything what I'd overheard, what I'd seen, the way they'd smiled in my face while sharpening their knives behind my back. He didn't interrupt. Just listened the way old soldiers listen to gunfire, with calm, knowing it's already too late to stop the noise, but not too late to fight back. When I was done, he set his coffee down carefully and said, "All right then. Let's make sure they don't get a dime." For the next 2 hours, the house turned into a war room. Randall opened his briefcase and pulled out a laptop, stacks of ledgers, and a portable scanner. He'd been an accountant for 40 years, and he treated every number like evidence in a courtroom. I handed him the folder I'd prepared: bank statements, property deeds, contracts. Every piece of my life laid bare. He whistled low. 15 million spread across 4 accounts, 3 properties, and 1 business holding. They were going to eat well off you, Pastor. Not if I starved them first, I said. He smiled faintly. You always did know how to turn the other cheek, just didn't say which one. We started closing in the circle. Randall made the calls that would lock the accounts under verification audits. I contacted the board of trustees at the church, telling them I needed to review the foundation's donations for the past year. I made sure the request sounded routine, casual. In truth, I was tracing every dollar Evelyn might have touched. By mid-morning, Randall had found something: a joint investment account Evelyn had opened with Marcus under a company name I didn't recognize. Silver Branch Holdings, he read aloud. Registered 3 months ago in both their names. My stomach turned, but my voice stayed calm. Can we shut it down? Not directly, he said. Typing fast, but we can freeze it under suspicion of misappropriated funds. You'll need proof. Then we'll get proof. He looked at me for a long moment, then said quietly, You know this won't be clean, James. You dig too deep, you might find more than you want to see. I met his eyes. Then I'll see it. All of it. He nodded once and went back to work. The morning passed in a blur of clicking keys and phone calls. My house, once a place of prayer and quiet, hummed with strategy. For the first time in weeks, I felt something like peace, not the fragile, trembling kind that comes from pretending everything's fine, but the solid kind that comes from taking your life back inch by inch. Around noon, Randall looked up from his screen. It's done, he said. Account secured. Holdings locked. If she tries to move anything now, the bank'll flag it and call you first. I exhaled slowly, the weight on my chest easing just a little. Thank you, brother. He closed his laptop. You're not done yet, he said softly. You're just holding the line. You still want to play this quiet? Yes, I said. Let them think they've still got the upper hand. Pride always makes people sloppy. He grinned. Amen to that. After he left, I sat there alone, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. My reflection stared back at me from the black screen of the laptop, a man older, harder but steady. I'd spent my life preaching about forgiveness, but forgiveness doesn't mean foolishness. God may command mercy, but he never said justice was off the table. I opened my Bible, the same one Evelyn used to read from, and turned to Proverbs. The prudent see danger and take refuge, but the simple keep going and pay the penalty. I ran my finger over the verse, slow, deliberate. I wasn't going to be the simple man anymore. The phone buzzed. A message from Evelyn running errands. Don't wait up for dinner. I stared at it for a moment, then deleted it. Let her keep her lies. Every step she took now was a step deeper into her own trap. That night I drove to the church. The parking lot was empty except for a few cars belonging to the cleaning staff. I walked through the sanctuary, the wooden floors echoing under my shoes. The stained glass windows glowed faintly from the setting sun, casting colors across the pews. I stopped at the altar, the same one where I'd married couples, baptized babies, buried the faithful. I knelt there, but this time I didn't pray for strength. I prayed for clarity. For the wisdom to walk this path without losing the man I was before all this. Somewhere deep inside, I knew that this wasn't about money anymore. It was about truth. About showing the world and them that a good man pushed too far isn't weak. He's patient. I left the church as the sun disappeared behind the trees, the air thick with the smell of rain. The first drops hit the windshield as I got into my truck and thunder rumbled low across the sky. It felt fitting, like the heavens themselves were shifting, making room for what was coming next. Because when a man like me stops turning the other cheek, the storm doesn't just pass. It changes everything in its path. By Friday morning, the storm had already started. I didn't have to lift a finger. I just watched it unfold, quiet as a man sitting in the back pew while judgment rolls through town. Evelyn had always loved her Fridays. That was her day to drive into the city, shop at those fancy boutiques, and sip coffee with the same church ladies who praised her on Sunday and envied her the rest of the week. I could picture her in her red blazer, chin-high heels, clicking against marble floors, ready to play the part of the preacher's wife, the woman who never missed a tithe, never wore the same dress twice, never let the world see a crack in her smile. But that morning, the mask slipped. Her card got declined right there in front of everyone. I wasn't there to see it, but in a small town like ours, news travels faster than prayer. By the time the clock hit noon, Deacon Lewis's wife had already called my secretary just to check on Evelyn, pretending it was out of concern. By 3 o'clock, I overheard 2 ushers whispering in the hallway about how the good Lord humbles all of us eventually. And by evening, half the congregation knew. It wasn't cruelty that spread the gossip, it was curiosity. Folks around here don't see a queen fall every day. Evelyn must have tried to play it off. I could imagine her standing there, fumbling in her purse for another card, laughing like it was a silly mistake. Maybe she said something like, "Oh, the bank must have made an error," in that practiced tone of grace she used to hide behind. But those women knew better. You can't fool people who've been smiling through their own storms for years. When she finally drove home, her gas tank was near empty. I knew that because she called the house before she got back, her voice strained but pretending calm. "James," she said, "there's something wrong with the bank. None of my cards are working." I waited a beat before answering. "I'm sure they'll fix it," I said evenly. "Banks make mistakes all the time." She hesitated. "Did you do something?" I smiled to myself, even though she couldn't see it. "Do something, Evelyn? Why would I?" There was a pause long enough for both of us to hear everything we weren't saying. Then she hung up. When she pulled into the driveway an hour later, the sound of her heels on the pavement was sharper than usual, like anger trying to hold its balance. She came inside, slammed her purse on the counter, and demanded, "You froze the accounts, didn't you?" I leaned against the kitchen doorway, arms crossed. "I didn't touch a thing," I said. "Maybe God decided to." Her eyes flashed. "Don't mock me, James." I stepped closer, close enough to see the panic behind the anger. "You've been mocking me for months," I said quietly. "The difference is, I know when to stop." She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. She looked smaller, then somehow, like all that pride she carried had started to crack. The silence stretched between us until she grabbed her purse again and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. I didn't follow her. I didn't need to. Some lessons don't come from confrontation, they come from consequence. Later that evening, I got a call from Randall. "You hear about your wife at the boutique?" he asked, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Word gets around," I said. "She's been calling every bank in town," he said. "Tried to move money that's no longer hers. They're all locked tight. You want me to release any of it?" "No," I said simply. "Let her sit in the silence a while. Maybe she'll hear the truth there." After I hung up, I stepped out onto the porch. The night air was warm, heavy with the smell of rain-soaked earth. Across the street, Mrs. Jefferson was watering her flowers, pretending not to look my way. Everyone was curious how the perfect marriage of Pastor James and Sister Evelyn had turned into a headline whispered in every grocery aisle. I didn't mind. Let them talk. I'd spent my whole life protecting my reputation, and for what reputation doesn't save your soul when you're lying next to a stranger every night? The next morning, I saw her car still in the driveway. She hadn't gone to choir practice. Normally, she'd be out before sunrise, picking up her friends humming gospel songs like she owned the Spirit of the Lord itself. But now she was trapped by her own pride, too ashamed to ask anyone for help, too proud to admit the life she'd built was built on deceit. I watched her through the curtain as she stepped outside to check the mailbox. She moved slower shoulders, stiff, glancing around like the world was watching. Maybe it was. The church ladies drove by in their sedans, pretending not to stare. She waved once, forced and quick, then went back inside. I should have felt pity. I didn't. Not yet. What I felt was something colder, quieter, a balance finally tipping back in my favor. For years I'd been the one swallowing pride, forgiving things that shouldn't have been forgiven, pretending not to notice the small betrayals. Now, for once, she was the one feeling the weight of exposure. That afternoon, Randall called again. Marcus tried to access one of the shared accounts, he said. Got flagged immediately. Bank notified the board. You want me to forward the report? Keep it, I said. For now. He chuckled. You always did play the long game. I learned from the best, I said. That night, Evelyn didn't come to bed. I heard her pacing downstairs, making phone calls, whispering angrily into the receiver. When the calls stopped, the silence that followed was almost peaceful. I knew she was realizing what it meant to lose control, not just of money, but of image. And for a woman like Evelyn, that was the deeper wound. As I lay there staring at the ceiling, I thought about how quickly power turns to dust when it isn't rooted in truth. She'd spent years building her kingdom on charm and deceit, and now it was crumbling one rumor at a time. By Sunday, the entire congregation would know something was wrong, and she'd have to walk into that church smile tight, pretending she hadn't fallen from grace. I turned off the light and let the darkness settle over me like armor. Justice didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered, and as I drifted off to sleep, I knew the whisper was only beginning to grow louder. Because come Sunday morning, the real reckoning would begin. The phone rang just after sundown. I was sitting on the porch, the crickets loud in the humid air, the sky turning the color of old bruises. I knew who it was before I even looked at the caller ID. My son had his mother's timing he always called when the air got heavy with gossip. I answered without hesitation. Dad. David said, his voice careful, tight. I've been hearing things. He didn't say what kind of things. He didn't have to. In a small town like ours, news moves like smoke. You can't catch it, but you can smell the fire from miles away. I leaned back in the chair, the wood creaking beneath me. People talk, I said evenly. They always have. This feels different, he said. It's about Mom, and about Marcus. He hesitated on the name the way a man does when he already knows it's poison. I just want to hear the truth from you. The truth? It's funny how people say they want it, but they never think about what it sounds like when it hits the air. I stood, opened the screen door, and walked inside. You home? I asked. Yeah, he said. Then come by, I told him. If you're going to hear it, you're going to hear it from me. He showed up 20 minutes later, still in his work clothes, shirt untucked, eyes tired. He looked older than I remembered. That happens when life gets too heavy, too fast. The moment he stepped into the house, I could see the confusion behind his eyes. He wanted to believe his mother, but something in him already knew she was lying. We didn't speak for a moment. I poured him a drink, neat, and handed it to him. He took it with shaking hands. Dad, he said finally, is any of this true? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I went to my desk, opened the drawer, and took out my phone. I scrolled to the file, pressed play, and set it down between us. Evelyn's voice filled the room, smooth and familiar, followed by Marcus's low laugh. The sound of their greed slithered through the air like smoke. David didn't move. He just sat there staring at the phone as if it had teeth. The recording went on plans about money, property, about how they'd handle me once the paperwork was done. When it ended, the silence in the room was heavier than any sermon I'd ever preached. He didn't say a word for a long time. His hand went to his mouth, the glass forgotten in his lap. Finally, he whispered, "That's Mom." "Yes," I said quietly. He looked up at me, eyes wet but not yet broken. "And Marcus," he said. "Yes." He stood and paced the room, one hand on his forehead, the other clenching and unclenching. She said they were just business meetings. She said you were being paranoid." His voice cracked. I defended her. I didn't say anything. Some pain doesn't need company. He turned back toward me. And my wife? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. I hesitated. She knew, I said. She didn't start it, but she didn't stop it either. He flinched like I'd struck him. You're sure I wish I wasn't? He sat back down, hard elbows on his knees, face buried in his hands. For a long time, the only sound in the room was the old clock ticking on the wall. I used to think you were too strict, he said finally, voice muffled. That you cared more about rules than feelings. I used to get mad every time you told me to think before I trusted someone. You weren't wrong to want to believe the best in people, I said softly. You just learned what it costs. He looked up at me, eyes red, and for the first time since he was a boy, he looked lost. What are you going to do? Already done it, I said. He nodded slowly as if trying to process the meaning behind those words. And Mom, she's going to learn what it means to live without the things she worshipped. He swallowed hard, his throat working. I can't believe she'd do this to you. To us. I sighed. Evil doesn't always come with horns and fire, son. Sometimes it comes wearing pearls and a church smile. He leaned back in the chair, rubbing his face. You always said pride ruins good people, he murmured. Guess I never thought it'd ruin my family. Neither did I. The room went quiet again, the kind of quiet that stretches until it starts to ache. He looked around at the photos on the wall, our family frozen in time, smiling like we'd never known betrayal. Do you still love her? He asked. I looked at the picture above the mantel. Evelyn in her Sunday dress, sunlight on her face, my arm around her shoulder. I stared at it long enough to feel the years fall heavy on me. I love the woman she used to be, I said finally. But that woman's been gone a long time. David nodded, jaw tight. Then without a word he stood and walked to the front door. He stopped, hand on the doorknob. You know, he said softly, I used to think you were unshakable, that nothing could hurt you. I smiled faintly. That's what I wanted you to think. He turned to me, and for the first time I saw something different in his eyes. Not pity, not confusion, but understanding. You're not just standing still, are you? I met his gaze. No, I said. I'm just getting started. He nodded slowly, opened the door, and stepped out into the night. The porch light caught his face for a moment, and I saw him the way I used to see myself, young, righteous, angry, but with a new kind of strength building behind the sorrow. When the door closed, I sat back in the quiet and exhaled. The weight on my shoulders didn't lift, but it shifted. For the first time since this whole thing began, I didn't feel alone. The boy who once doubted my judgment now carried a piece of it in his own heart. I poured myself another drink and stared out the window at the road stretching into darkness. The crickets had gone quiet, replaced by the low hum of distant thunder. Something was coming. I could feel it in my bones. And this time, I wouldn't be the only one ready for it. Sunday came heavy with heat and silence. The kind of morning where even the cicadas seemed to hush, like the air itself was waiting for something to break. I woke before dawn, my body moving on habit, though my heart felt like a weight tied to my chest. Evelyn was gone before sunrise. She hadn't said where she was going, but I didn't need to ask. There were only 2 places left for her to hide: her mother's house or behind the walls of the same church she'd helped poison. I stood in front of the mirror while tying my tie, studying the man staring back at me. The lines around my eyes were deeper now, my hair grayer, but there was something steadier there too. No more shame, no more pretending. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't walking into that church as a husband trying to save face. I was walking in as a man ready to tell the truth, even if it set the whole place on fire. The drive was short. The parking lot was already full. Word had spread, of course it had. You can't keep sin quiet in a small town, not when it's wrapped in church clothes. I could see the stares from the moment I stepped out of my truck. Whispers, pitying looks, a few tight smiles that tried too hard. It didn't matter. Let them whisper. I had nothing left to lose, and that kind of freedom makes a man dangerous in all the right ways. Inside the sanctuary buzzed with tension. The organist stopped mid-song when she saw me, hands hovering over the keys. The deacons exchanged glances, waiting for some signal from me. I gave them none. I just walked straight down the aisle to the pulpit, Bible in hand, every step echoing off the wooden floor like a slow drumbeat. When I reached the front, I didn't speak right away. I just stood there scanning the faces of the people who'd known me for decades, the same folks who'd trusted me to baptize their children, bury their dead, and bless their marriages. They deserved the truth, even if it came with splinters. "Brothers and sisters," I said, finally, my voice low but clear. "I know you've all heard things, and I know some of what you've heard sounds too wild to be real. But I've learned that when pride walks into a home, love is the first thing to leave. You could have heard a pin drop. Even the babies were quiet." Evelyn's empty seat in the front row looked like an open wound. "I've stood in this pulpit for 20 years. I continued preaching about faith, about trust, about forgiveness. I believe my house was built on those same things. But faith without truth is just theater, and for too long I let that show go on. I felt my throat tighten, but I didn't let the tears come. My voice grew stronger, instead steadier. My wife, the woman you've all known as Sister Evelyn Carter, betrayed that trust, not just mine, but yours. She plotted against me, and she wasn't alone in doing it. Some of you might have guessed, others might have denied it. But I stand here now not to ask for pity and not to cast blame. I stand here to tell you that the Lord don't sleep on truth. And even a preacher's home can fall when pride becomes its cornerstone." A murmur swept through the congregation. I saw Deacon Lewis lower his head. The choir director clasped her hands like she'd been holding her breath for weeks. I caught sight of Randall in the back row, nodding once, solemn and proud. "I've learned something in all this," I said, my tone softening. "That faith isn't about appearances. It's about what you do when the lights go out and no one's watching. It's about how you stand when the very people you love try to bury you alive." A woman in the third pew, old Sister Harper, who'd known me since I was a boy, wiped her eyes. "Speak the truth, Pastor," she whispered, just loud enough for the whole church to hear. So I did. I told them how I'd found out how the lies had unraveled, how the Lord had guided me through the storm without letting me lose myself to hate. I didn't share the ugly details. I didn't need to. The truth has a way of shining through even when you whisper it. When I finished, I closed my Bible and said, "I will not step down from this pulpit. I will not let sin write the ending of my story. The devil tried to make me bitter, but God made me wise. So if you came here today looking for gossip, I hope you leave with something heavier, because gossip fades, but truth stands." Then I stepped back. The silence held for one long, fragile moment. And then it broke, not with gasps or whispers, but with applause. Slow at first, then louder, rolling through the church like thunder. Some were crying, others shouting, "Amen." The sound filled every corner of that sanctuary, and for the first time in a long time I felt the kind of peace that doesn't come from pretending, it comes from surviving. When the service ended, people lined up to shake my hand. One by one they looked me in the eye, not with pity but respect. "We're proud of you, Pastor," they said. "Took courage to stand up like that." Randall clapped a hand on my shoulder and leaned in close. "You didn't just preach today," he said. "You testified." I nodded, but I didn't smile. My victory wasn't something to celebrate. It was something to carry. Outside the sun was brutal, the kind of heat that feels like judgment itself. Across the street, a few of the ladies were whispering near their cars. Normally I'd care, but not today. Today I let the noise roll off me. As I walked to my truck, I saw David waiting near the steps, arms crossed. His eyes met mine and he gave a small nod. No words, no questions. Just understanding. We didn't have to speak. We both knew what came next. Because even as truth was setting me free, it was tightening a noose around the people who tried to destroy me. And when Sunday's grace fades into Monday's reckoning, that's when real judgment begins. Months passed like pages in a book I'd already read but couldn't put down. The dust had settled, the rumors died down, and life quiet. Ordinary life had started to hum again. My name no longer floated through church gossip or coffee shop whispers. Folks still looked at me with that mix of pity and respect, but I didn't mind. I'd learned that reputation isn't something you chase. It's something you rebuild, brick by steady brick. The business had survived, barely. Randall helped me navigate every tangle of paperwork, every frozen account, every hidden trap Evelyn and Marcus had tried to leave behind. By spring, I'd reopened the company under a new name, Carter & Sons Restoration. The irony wasn't lost on me. Restoration, it's what I'd been doing all along. We didn't build new homes anymore. We repaired what was broken. It felt fitting. I hired a small crew, men I'd known for years. Some I'd even baptized. Men who'd seen their own worlds collapse, who came to work each morning not just to earn a paycheck, but to start over. There was something holy about that, about watching people rebuild something they thought they'd lost forever. In the evenings, I started leading small Bible studies out on my porch. No microphones, no stained glass, no titles. Just men with tired eyes and scarred hands sharing stories of betrayal, divorce, loss. We didn't talk about revenge or judgment. We talked about forgiveness, the kind that doesn't mean letting someone hurt you twice. Forgiving ain't forgetting. I told them once, staring at the orange glow of the setting sun, it's remembering without letting it poison you. They nodded, some wiping their eyes when they thought no one was watching. I knew that look. It was the look of men who'd carried too much for too long. Evelyn never came to those meetings. She wouldn't have, even if she'd been invited. Word around town was that she'd taken a job at the grocery store off Main Street, stocking shelves and bagging groceries for people who used to praise her Sunday dresses. The first time I saw her there, I was caught off guard. She didn't see me at first. She was bent over straightening boxes of cereal. When she finally looked up, our eyes met. For a second, neither of us moved. She looked older, smaller somehow. The shine was gone, the painted nails, the expensive jewelry, the air of superiority. In their place was something almost fragile. She opened her mouth like she might say something, but I just nodded once and pushed my cart past her. No words, no anger, just peace. Later that night, sitting on the porch, I thought about that moment, about how love can turn into something sharp, then dull again until all that's left is memory. I wasn't angry anymore. Not at her, not at Marcus, not even at myself. Anger had kept me alive when everything else had fallen apart, but it wasn't a place I could live forever. The sun was setting slow that evening, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. The air smelled like rain and cut grass. David pulled up just as the last light faded. His little boy, my grandson, climbing out of the truck behind him, waving a toy hammer like it was the key to the kingdom. "Grandpa Daddy says we're going to help fix the porch tomorrow," he shouted. I laughed, the sound startling me. It had been too long since I'd heard it come from my own mouth. "Well," I said, "you better bring your best hammer then." David smiled, that same mix of pride and guilt still lingering in his eyes. We didn't talk much about what happened anymore. We didn't need to. Some wounds close without words. He'd sold the house he shared with his wife and bought a modest place nearby. Said he wanted his boy to grow up seeing what hard work looked like. I didn't argue. When they left that night, the house was quiet again, but it wasn't lonely. The kind of quiet I felt now wasn't heavy, it was earned. I sat back in my chair, the old wood creaking under me, and watched the horizon fade to gray. I thought about the men from Bible study, about Randall, who still checked on me every week, about Evelyn bagging groceries under fluorescent lights, and about Marcus, who'd lost his license and reputation in one clean sweep. Justice had found them without me lifting another hand. God has a way of cleaning his own house when you stop trying to do it for him. The crickets started up their nightly hymn, and a cool breeze drifted through the yard. I took a sip of coffee decaf now. Too many years of the real stuff had worn my nerves thin and let the peace of it sink in. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't replaying the past or plotting the future. I was just there, present, whole. They say forgiveness is freedom. And maybe that's true. But it's not the kind of freedom you feel all at once. It's quiet. It creeps in slowly like sunrise. You wake one morning and the bitterness is gone, not because you forgot what happened, but because it doesn't own you anymore. The stars came out one by one until the sky was full of them. I looked up, breathed deep, and thought of my father. "The Lord don't sleep on truth," he'd said. And he was right. The truth had found its way out not through shouting or vengeance, but through patience. I leaned back the boards of the porch cool beneath my bare feet and smiled to myself. Everything I'd lost had been replaced with something sturdier. Not the same life, but a better one. The kind built slow, steady, honest. The kind that doesn't glitter but lasts. And as the night deepened, I realized something I'd never thought I'd say. I was grateful. Grateful for the storm that tore my house apart because it taught me how to rebuild the foundation stronger than before. What came next? Only God knew. But for the first time in a long while, that didn't scare me at all. Life has a way of testing what we claim to believe. We preach forgiveness, patience, and faith, but only hardship proves whether we truly understand them. When betrayal strikes, it's easy to let bitterness take root. Yet holding on to anger only keeps us tied to the people who wronged us. True peace begins the moment we decide to stop carrying their burden. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or excusing what happened. It means freeing ourselves to live without the weight of resentment. For those of us who've lived long enough to know loss and disappointment, this is the quiet truth. Wisdom isn't born from avoiding pain. It's born from surviving it with grace. Rebuilding even after heartbreak isn't about starting over. It's about starting wiser. If this story reminded you of your own journey of lessons learned, faith tested, or peace hard-earned, share your thoughts below. Your experience might be the strength someone else needs today. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that speak to the heart, where justice, faith, and wisdom always find their way home.